Hey everybody, this is LMP Games, and welcome back to episode 7, I think, of our RPG Maker MV event tutorial series. If you're new to the series, what this series of tutorials is about is how to make different types of events in RPG Maker MV. A lot of this applies to most versions of RPG Maker because the eventing system hasn't really changed too much. And at the very least, the principles can be applied the same, if not the actual implementation. So today what we'll be talking about is cutscene basics. It's like the basics of creating cutscenes, what you need, what you should have, and we'll be kind of, as with the other ones, because they kind of dovetail together, especially when we're talking about cutscenes. We'll be talking about writing a little bit as well, and what makes a good cutscene, and how you can kind of structure it to work the way you want to. We're going to cheat a little bit on this one because we've actually already made a cutscene-ish section. If you remember back when we did the enemies on maps, the on-map enemies video episode, we created a mini cutscene in here. So you go in here, you kill these bat enemies, and when you leave and come back, a new enemy appears, and there's a small dialogue cutscene-ish thing that plays, and then you enter into battle with that enemy. And there's a small cutscene after it as well. Yeah, I think let's go and actually play test this, and I will show you what a simple cutscene looks like. So we're going to come over here, we're going to kill off these bats. I believe I weakened the bats the last time when we did this, the final version of this, so we're just going to go ahead and kill these guys. Should be like 1 or 2 hits. Yeah. So what's happening here is we have some switches that we're turning on. And again, a switch is basically just a thing that's either on or off. And you can use this to control when things happen and when they shouldn't happen. So every time we kill one of these guys, we're turning on a switch. Actually, it may be a game variable that we're populating a value to, and the switch comes in later. I think that's what it is. We're adding it to a game variable for every time we finish a battle, and then on the return back into the map on the map transfer, I think we have a conditional that says if that game variable has a certain value, then we're going to turn on a switch that will hide the bats and show the other enemies. So we're gonna go ahead and leave now since we beat those guys. We'll come back. Now we just got this, and now see, here's kind of a cutscene. We got characters that are talking. We kind of don't have control over the character at the moment. And then you enter into this. I think we can beat this. I think we give it a pretty good fire weakness, so I'm just gonna go ahead and try and kill it. We did give it more defense, so I think it made it a little bit more difficult to, yeah, because I wanted it to be a harder fight so we could lose, potentially. The way it was set up before, you couldn't lose it. It would just be essentially a battle of attrition. There was no real threat of losing. Now you can lose because he does way more damage and takes less physical damage. Okay, good. He didn't attack Lucius again. As I screwed up the selection there. So you kind of call this like a quasi-boss fight here. That's what it's supposed to kind of be resemble. It's what it's supposed to resemble. This just will do absolutely no damage. Actually, it did 13. Ooh, double attack. Definitely need to heal Herald. There we go. And then there's going to be a cutscene that happens after the battle if you win. Well, there's one if you win and one if you lose. This one's a bit longer though because there are some extra effects as opposed to the other one, which is just the Minotaur saying stuff and then go into the game over screen. Then we kind of have a one of those old school kind of, you know, the bats is dropping. One of those old school blink out of existent effects. So that's technically what a cutscene is. So all that is, like I said, is I think we have a game variable on, yeah, bat counter. So what I'm guessing is if we go to the transfer to this map, turn this on. We're gonna find that we have a, yeah, so there we go. Bat counter is greater than or equal to 3. We're gonna turn on spawn Minotaur. And then when we turn that on, if we come back over to our other map, we're gonna find that we have a event here that's set to run on parallel. That allows us to have the Minotaur event do stuff and move around during the cutscene. Most cutscenes are going to be doing will be done with a parallel, probably doing the control for that scene. So we have some text. We have on this one, Harold starts saying something, but then he gets interrupted. Let me open this up. This here, yeah, you can kind of see that. This text code will automatically close the text window when you use it. So essentially, Harold is saying something and he gets interrupted by the Minotaur speaking. And we also kind of reinforce that by having Harold have an exclamation balloon above him when the Minotaur speaks, like he wasn't expecting it, so exclamation like, what's going on, what the hell kind of thing. Then the Minotaur does the thing and has that same, has some wait, 1/4 second wait commands, and that automatic close window command, and then it has a move route to move the Minotaur to the player, which we have timed up just right, so where when the Minotaur gets to the player, it jumps you right into the battle, so it seems like as soon as he hits you, you're fighting, so the illusion of that scene is complete that way. And this is something like this, there is no try and tested way to make this kind of thing work. You just have to fiddle around until you get something that works, which can be annoying when you have a lot of moving parts and a lot really complex cutscenes. Something like the battle processing, and if we win, we have this, and then we have that transparent flash thing with the Minotaur dying. And if we lose, we have another thing where the Minotaur just says this, and then you go to the game over screen. And that is this cutscene and how it was constructed. So, what is a cutscene? A cutscene is a moment in a game where you are progressing the story, or giving the player a moment to kind of rest and absorb information. A lot of people think of a cutscene as like it's a moment for crazy things to happen and stuff like that, but really at the core of what a cutscene is supposed to do is it's supposed to give the player a moment to kind of relax and absorb critical information about the game story. Either whether it's like an actual scene that's happening, it's like exposition, something like that. That's what cutscenes are designed to do. The way those are usually executed in video games is you have a series of events that lead up to a moment, and in that moment, you essentially take control away from the player in some way and stick them in this cutscene that happens where they don't have any control and they're just kind of watching what's happening. The way in which you start a cutscene matters. It matters more for more modern, like 3D games. In these 2D top-down games, there's really only so many moments that cutscenes can really be constructed in. Or, well, maybe not the right wording. There's only a few ways you can actually start a cutscene. There's still some important rules. First is that you shouldn't randomly start cutscenes in like the middle of a map or something like that, unless there's a reason for it. So like if you just have a map, like let's say we just have this map over here, and the player's just walking through here, and you put a trigger for a cutscene here that just happens, and it's like something like saying, oh, there's an item shop over here, we should go there. That type of cutscene isn't relevant. It doesn't give the player any information that they don't know. It feels very shoehorned in, and it will make the game feel, like that moment in the game feel weird, because, you know, it feels like you're trying to tell the player, oh, here's a thing that you probably ignored, you should probably go there, kind of thing. And that's not really what cutscenes are supposed to be about. There's way too many examples in games of games using cutscenes to treat the player like they're stupid, and try and handhold them through stuff, or like force them to go and do something. Now, there are specific cases where that could be not only acceptable, but also the correct way, the correct thing to do. And that is, like, if it's very specific, very story relevant, kind of like if you don't know this one particular thing because you can, it's like, unless you go into this shop, and this is actually a symptom of a bigger problem. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you don't go into this one shop right now, you'll miss this key important story point, and without that story point, the story later on will not make any sense. One way people try and deal with that is to create a situation like this, where if you walk past a place, you'll have a character that jumps out and says, oh, we should probably go there for whatever reason, right? Those are... Now I'm going to contradict what I just said earlier, because this technically is a paradoxical situation. That's a symptom of a game that is not... of a story that is not paced correctly, not properly... What's the word I'm trying to think of here? Paced is probably not the right word either. It's not... Like, for example, okay, so let's say, look at it this way. Let's say that you want the player to go to a shop, right, to see this cutscene that happens. It gives them this important story information. The way to handle that would be to, some point before this map that you get to where the shop is at, would be to tell the player through cutscene or NPC dialogue somewhere, oh, you should go to this shop, and give them a specific reason that would make them go to the shop. Like, oh, the shop has 50% off on potions at the moment, or something like that, or half off on magic potions. Something that would get them to actually go there and interact with the shop, as opposed to saying just go there, right? And then when they get there, this scene happens, and it's kind of just like a, you know, you've then directed them to where you want them to go in a way that doesn't make it seem like you've directed them where you want them to go. I can tell you that most gamers will resent the hell out of a game that tries to tell them where and what to do and how to do it. The mind of a gamer is such that they want to experiment, they want to just go do stuff. They don't necessarily want to be specifically told, and even told multiple times, that they have to go do something specific. You know, if it's not part of a quest. Like, if you're just out there wandering around, and there's like this weird story-specific information that's not part of the main quest, it's not even part of a quest period, and obviously they don't know that, but you know, the game's telling them, oh, you should go to this shop. Oh, you should go to this shop. And they meet another NPC, like 2 or 3 NPCs every map that says, oh, you should go to this shop. One's going to be obvious at that point to them what's going on, and 2, it's not going to feel organic. It's going to feel very forced in the story up to that point. Like, they're going to have a really weird feeling about the story. Now, like I said before, though, the proper way to do that is to direct the player to go somewhere without actually telling them to go somewhere. You have to kind of get into the mind of a player and say, okay, if I'm a gamer playing this game, and what would make me go to this shop? And like, I think probably the easiest way to do it would be to think of like whatever the most expensive item that they can get at this point is, put it in that shop and say it's like half off, and actually make it half off, so there's a reason to go there. And then you can have that scene happen there. The even better approach would be is to make going to that shop part of the main quest line somehow. Like, for example, maybe you have the player break their sword and they have to go to that. Let's say this shop is actually like a blacksmith. You have to go to the blacksmith to have their weapon fixed, repaired, and then you can, you know, an even more reasonable scenario, get them to that place to see that scene happen. So the way that cutscenes are constructed, the way that you place them in your stories, the way the players are kind of shepherded into them, all matter. And all will have a huge impact on how players perceive your story. So let's talk about some specific stuff, kind of more writing-oriented stuff, but things that could make your cutscenes better. Put down in the comments if you've ever played a game where you're talking to an NPC and they have like the names displayed, and you're talking to this NPC, and somehow your character knows that NPC's name without ever having been to that town before, never talking to that NPC before, but you somehow already know their name. This is something that happens in a lot of different games. One thing you can do, and some of it's kind of a conceit because you kind of, you know, unless you want to do something where you're doing like hyper amounts of lore, you'll probably have to concede to this one specific, well, not one specific, this specific, I don't even know, it's not really a trope, it's a, suspension of disbelief kind of thing, where you as the character know everybody's names without actually having met them before. Now, if you really want to make your game feel grounded in reality and make the world feel, you know, lived in, one thing you can do is for every character that every NPC that your character would know, when you first talk to them, introduce them through some kind of monologue from the character that tells the player what that character knows about that NPC. I'll show you an example from my game, if I can find where it's at. So, in my game, I'm kind of going the full route, right? If the character doesn't know that NPC and has no reason to know that NPC, they won't know what the name is until that NPC tells them what their name is. But if they do know the NPC, the first time they talk to them, the character is going to give a kind of internal thing about what they know about that character. Where is this at? This one? Yeah, here we go. Alright, so this is gleamed to Clario, which is the town the player is from, player character is from. So he would know a lot of the people that are in this town, not most or all of them. So what happens when you talk to this NPC the very first time, and we have like a thing here that is tracking if you've talked to them before. Has this dialogue here. Let me pull this out. And so we can see it better. Turn this off. All right, so essentially, when you go talk to this guy, you'll get like a window that pops up that's one of those kind of internal monologue windows. And it'll say, as you approach Clary, you spot Harold and Delph on duty. Harold is a cleric boy born and bred. Delph is from Cromwell, but has been assigned here to Gaelic province. So this is kind of like, what the character knows about those characters, and you establish their names, so that when you show text from them, showing their names makes sense because you know what they are. And if you don't know what a NPC's name is, it'll just say something like this guy down here, or just a generic like Realm Guard Lieutenant, because you don't know what his name is. Yeah, okay, it doesn't ever. This one's not an example of like a one where you learn his name. Like, what I would do, like if I wanted to give this guy a name, and he does have a name actually. But I just never say what it is in here. But if I wanted to have the player tell the player what the name was, what I would do is I'd have one of his subordinates call him Lieutenant Famor, since that's his name. And then from that point on, anytime this NPC is talking to the character, the name for that NPC would be Realm Guard Lieutenant Famor, or RG Lieutenant Famor. Like this guy up here was RGP. I wonder if I should have it be RG Private Harold as opposed to P. Need to think about that, because that one down there would be RGL Famor instead of Realm Guard Lieutenant Famor. I guess I could still use the abbreviation for their rank to keep the name length down a bit. That's like an example of how you can make your cutscenes feel a bit more polished, right? Is by little details like that. One of the other things you can do is have cutscenes execute a bit differently, potentially, if you have other characters in your party. Like in case for this one, if I have Kyrith in my party, he'll say something a little bit different than if I don't. So, like this one says, "Whoa there, lad," and this one says, "Whoa there, lads." Acknowledging that there's more than one person in this group coming towards him. Again, little details like this make a huge difference. You would, if you're like a first-time game dev, you're thinking, oh, it doesn't matter if he says lad or lads if there's more than one person in the party, because it's only talking to the main character. But realistically, he would say lad if there's one person, and lads if there's more than one person. Just, that's how people talk. Which is the next big point about cutscenes. Make your NPCs talk like actual people. Have them use contractions, have them react in reasonable ways. If you're going for a sort of tropey kind of NPC with a certain type of dialogue pattern, still, do that pattern, but still fit it within a reasonable construct of what somebody would that would normally be like. Don't have them talking like robots. like if you go to a guard and that guard that's like, let's say you put a guard here and like let's say he's supposed to warn the player about enemies in the area or something. Don't have him say, "Oh, you should look out. There are monsters in the area." You know, make him say that with a little more embellishment. Like, should be careful out there. People have been reporting monsters in the area. Something like that. Give it more of a human kind of touch to it. Like these posted signs. Here's another good one. Just gonna look at. So this is like kind of the same sort of thing, telling you about, you know, beyond this point, essentially that you're gonna get into random fights. Well, I do that by showing essentially it's like a notice from the monarchy saying that after this point, you are not guaranteed to be protected by the realm guard. Which means that after this point, you can get into fights. I kind of like that there for some world building. At the same time, though, I don't know. Like, this is something I've struggled with adding or keeping or removing, because the implication is that this should be posted anywhere where you can get into random encounters. The problem is then it has to be put anywhere you can get into random encounters. It's just, you know, anywhere where you enter into a zone, because actually in my game there are zones in a map where you can't get into random encounters because they're being protected by guards, right? So like up in here we got these two guys, we got some guards over here, got some guards over here, and ostensibly what would happen is that they are protecting these zones so that people don't get attacked in them, and that so enemies don't get into the cities that they're guarding the entrances for. At least for these two. This goes to the Fell Desert. And then you like have this path here that's just like fully picketed in and is obviously like well maintained. And then you get to this point and beyond here it's not so maintained, or those picketed fences are like have holes in them and enemies can kind of get into this area. So, like, this is some world building stuff, but again, this is like this is not so much a cutscene as it is like a way to use events to kind of build out the lore a little bit, the world a little bit. But still kind of fits because it's, you know, it's not just something saying, oh, you're gonna get attacked past here. It's actual, you know, it's a in-world kind of notice of that. And you need to write your NPCs during cutscenes with that same kind of thought process. Like, would these NPCs actually, you know, talk like this? Would they act like this? Etc. So, back over to our other one here. So, now, some more basics for cutscenes. Obviously for cutscenes, switches are important because that allows you to control the flow of things. Most cutscenes are going to be triggered by a switch or game variable value. And usually the game variable values will actually control a switch on or off. Unless you're using this option, which I would recommend not doing because it gets really annoying to deal with after a while, especially if you have a branched story where multiple things can happen for multiple reasons. This won't allow you to really do that very well. So you need to, you know, plan out, you know, don't just like put a cutscene into place because you want to, make it be there for a reason. Have like a plan for why it happens, when it happens, how it happens, what triggers it to happen. If it's an optional cutscene, like if the player, it's triggered by the player doing something specific during a particular part of the game, and this happens after on if you did that thing, then, you know, would this have any then add-on effects? Like, would it cause anything else to happen? And then if those things happened, you know, what things during this cutscene could happen that would change things later on as well. So cutscenes are a pretty powerful tool. They allow you to convey story information. They allow you to establish story facts. They allow you to show cool shit to the player. They allow you to set up situations where the player can interact with the story itself and kind of determine how things progress. And they have to be used in the right way and in reasonable ways, because it can, cutscenes are, out of all the tools you have as a game developer, cutscenes are one of the things that you can easily mess up and have it destroy the pace and flow of your game, or at least the experience the player has playing your game. So let's talk about what a story fact is. So a story fact is something that is true, that the story tells the player is true. So it's not just like an NPC saying something. It's, well, it is an NPC saying something, but essentially it's saying that, like, let's say, let's use Dragon Ball Z as an example. It's a story fact that Frieza destroyed Vegeta. It isn't something that somebody said happened. The actual story of the show shows that it happened, so it's a story fact. Story facts are extremely powerful tools. They're also extremely dangerous tools. Have you ever heard the phrase of, like, writing yourself into a corner? That happens because you write specific story facts that later on you either decide to change, or that turn out they don't work the way that you want them to with the rest of the story. And then what happens is that you have to then start figuring out, okay, well, this story fact is only true when these other things are also true. And you start, like, having these piecemeal kind of, like, retcon story facts coming in to modify the story fact you already said was true, so that you can do something specific. You're always going to have situations where you have, like, a conflict like that, because unless you're an extremely good writer, or you have extreme planning in terms of, like, you know exactly where your story and your game is going, you know exactly what can happen, and so on and so forth. Most games are not that well planned, so you'll run into a lot of situations in games where, usually not really big ones, but you'll have, like in a lot of AAA games, you'll have some small things that are kind of weird. Like, for example, saying Tails, going back to DBZ. Was that? Maybe I'm thinking of some other show, but I thought in DBZ or in Dragon Ball they established that Saiyan tails can grow back when they're cut off, but then Vegeta and Gohan's never do. I thought that was a thing. Maybe it wasn't. No, I'm not so sure. That's another example of this, and that actually works. As an example. Well, think of any show you watch that has a retcon in it at some point. That retcon is put in specifically to change something so that they can do whatever they want to with the story at that point in time. That's basically like the classic example of a situation where a writer's written themselves into a corner. They have to create something in the past, justify it in the future, to then justify what they want to do with the story that they couldn't do before because they didn't have... their story facts would have prevented it. So one of the best ways to handle story facts is don't use them, honestly. That's my take on it anyway. Always have NPCs state something. Because if an NPC says it, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It's just what that NPC is saying. Now, if you want to establish something as a fact that way, you have multiple NPCs say it at some point throughout the story. Like you can essentially have an NPC say something, and then throughout the game have that point reinforced through other dialogue. Then eventually that becomes a story fact that way. I think that's a better way to handle it, because at any point you want to change that fact to something else because of reasons, you could just have an NPC that would know this. You know, it can't be just any NPC. It has to be an NPC that would know that this specific thing is not actually true. Say that it isn't true, and then you have to have some way of showing that it isn't true. You can't just have them say it isn't true. Or it would have to be from a person, like from an NPC that would absolutely 100% know that this is true or false. That's the way I handle it anyway. If I deal with story facts, it's usually stuff that's very explicit, like, you know, this country is a democracy, and it's like, it's verifiable, 100% verifiable just based on what you know about the game world, kind of thing. As opposed to something that maybe or may not be true, but we're going to say it's true because it makes it more interesting. Then later on it's going to be false because we want to make it false now, because it'd be more interesting if this thing was false, because then we can have this cutscene happen in this specific way that would subvert what the player thinks is true. Which are that method of like subverting expectations is really cheesy and really cheap. Frankly, it's really bad writing. The better way to do it is to build something up based on supposition, and then at a certain point reveal that supposition to have been entirely based on false information and reveal the truth. Harry Potter, like Snape in Harry Potter is the perfect example of this. There are so many subversions within his story as a character that not until the very last book do you really understand, you know, Snape. Which I think that's a hallmark of a really well-written character, and a really good use of, you know, these story facts in a way that makes it so that you can make that kind of a twist in the story without it seeming cheap and manufactured, for just like the shock value of it. So be really careful with what you have NPCs say. Never just have them, unless it's something very explicitly true in your game's world, or that the player can kind of intuit from the story so far that is true, that the thing would be true. Don't have them unequivocally say it's true. Always kind of build it up through multiple interactions with NPCs. That way, if you want to make it different at some point, you can. Otherwise, you've kind of made that thing set in stone, and the only way to really unmake it is to, you know, essentially break the story by retconning something in that makes it not true, which again is really bad writing, to be honest. Other things that for cutscenes that you need to know when working, like just starting out with cutscenes. The fewer number of NPCs in your cutscenes, the better early on when you're first getting used to making them, because one, as you add in other NPCs, your cutscenes get exponentially, not just, it doesn't get multiple times harder, it gets exponentially harder. Like, you know, you have two NPCs talking, it's easy to go back and forth and deal with the, you know, dialogue and changes to that dialogue and stuff like that. You had a third NPC, and now you have 3 different NPCs to manage the dialogue for, how that dialogue unfolds. You got 4, then 5, then 6, and then, you know, it gets exponentially much harder to deal with, because now you're dealing with like 6 NPCs. Maybe some of them have like dialogue choices that you can select to give the player an option of where they want to go in terms of like their character's personality, and based on those, you know, the responses from other NPCs change. So now you have to deal with that across, you know, all those switches across 6 NPCs, probably multiple times throughout a piece of dialogue during a cutscene, and that becomes extremely difficult to manage. So, when you're first starting out working with cutscenes and kind of getting your mind around them, smaller is better. in terms of the number of participants. Also, cutscene length is also a thing to think about. Personally, I don't ascribe to this. There is a little bit of merit to it, but I don't think it's really a real issue. People say that you should limit your cutscenes to like 3 minutes or so. If they go over that, you start risking losing the player's interest. I don't believe that. If your cutscene is interesting enough, like the writing and the story that you're building up and the things, like the story of the cutscene, not just the game, but the story in your cutscene is interesting enough, it's going to keep their attention. I don't necessarily buy into this whole thing about like shortening attention spans and stuff like that. I think it's a excuse for people to make less, you know, for studio execs to make less and less amount of content and less focused content, because it's easier for them to do that. So I don't buy into all that. At the same time, though, pacing is a thing. So unless like you absolutely are sure you need to do something extremely long, don't do it to be a long cutscene. If you have, like, let's say you have a bunch of dialogue, it might be entirely reasonable for you to have all that dialogue there for whatever reason. But if there's a way that you can shorten it down, make it more succinct, more to the point, like if your dialogue has a lot of places where it seems to be repeating and rambling a bit, you know, you could trim that down. That's something you can actually go to and say, okay, I can shorten this a bit because this is just, we're just repeating things you've already said, and you know, there's no real benefit to putting all this in. At the same time, if you're like explaining an event that happened in the past or something in large amount of detail, then perhaps that would be an example of where that would be acceptable. The better option in that case, though, would be to actually show it. So this is the idea of show, don't tell, right? I don't know, you might have heard this thing in regards to games and like movies and stuff. In books, it's a little bit different because there is no showing in books, but in games and other visual media, there is this aspect of show, don't tell. So instead of having an NPC saying all this stuff is happening, you know, you'll need to establish that whatever the player's looking at is not the present, so some sort of visual aesthetic to it to make it obviously the past. But then have that like historical scene actually take place and have the player interact with it, like have them take control of one of the characters in that event as it plays out, as opposed to having an NPC telling the player, the actual player character that they're playing in the game, what happened. It's just a much more kind of visceral way to do those kinds of scenes. But it is a bit harder because you need to create more things, maps and things like that. You have to write characters. You have to, you know, work on their personalities and such like that. But the payoff is that the scene actually, you know, the player will feel stuff from that more than just reading what an NPC is saying about it. An example of where having a bunch of text to be acceptable is like, let's say that your character is undergoing a lecture or something, and the instructor is given this huge explanation about things relating to the game world or something. Like, well, like in the case of my game, there's this, I think, 5 to 7 minute cutscene where the instructor is talking about different weapons, how they're utilized in battle, and the theories behind, you know, how they're used and such, and when they would be implemented, and like their drawbacks and their strengths and stuff like that. I think in those situations it's warranted, you know, understandable to have a bunch of dialogue that just is like a wall of text. But in general, you should try and avoid, you know, massive walls of text if possible. Especially if it's just one NPC talking. If you have like a bunch of text, but it's like dialogue between a bunch of different NPCs, that's fine. Again, though, also make sure it's interesting. Let's see what else. What else can I think of? This is kind of a little more disjointed of a video in terms of this, because I'm kind of thinking about things as opposed to having like a plan for what we're going to be talking about. What is another major thing that happens in a lot of games that I should mention? No, I think that's most of it, like for the basics. So just to kind of go over a little bit of what we talked about. Cutscenes are pretty important. They allow you to progress the story in your game. They allow you to give the player story facts. They allow you to set up storylines within the story. Allow you to establish new characters, stuff like that. To establish events that happened in the past. All kinds of things. But they also have a lot of pitfalls that you have to be aware of and work around. And be vigilant of not falling into. And that's like a really, really difficult thing for new game developers to do, because that's not something that just comes naturally unless you are used to writing stories and things. Like how to pace out a scene, how dialogue should work, how interactions should work. And then when you add in all the other aspects of games and game design, it becomes even more difficult, because then you also have to worry about, okay, if I do this thing here, should that have any implication later on? Like, if I give the player an option to destroy something in this cutscene, should that have a callback later on and some sort of consequence? The answer is usually yes, by the way. If you give the player an option to do something, that should absolutely have some sort of callback or some sort of consequence later on. You should never have anything that happens just to have it happen. There should always be some kind of thing that happens as a result of that, good or bad. And I would heavily restate the good or bad part. Like, make the player's choices, if you give them choices during a cutscene, actually matter, and give them both things that can happen that are good, like being able to recruit a new character later on because of something that you said or did, and bad things like you know, having your character arrested later on because you killed somebody. You know, give them those choices and then make those choices actually have an impact on the character later on in the story. And if you want examples of that, all you have to do is go play Chrono Trigger. There's a bunch of stuff you can do like at the beginning of the game that has an impact on, kind of an impact. It's more, Chrono Trigger's example of this thing that we're talking about is a little less, it doesn't have that much of an impact on the story itself, but it does make us for an interesting scene that happens later on after that part of the game. But that's a pretty good example of that sort of thing. So yeah, be careful with cutscenes. If a cutscene feels like it's dragging on or too long, it probably is. If you feel like the dialogue's too rambly or could be, you know, written in a more succinct way, try and do it. And remember to show and not tell whenever possible. Oh, one other thing to mention. So, you've probably heard of this concept about player knowledge and character knowledge. If you haven't, you might have heard a phrase such as, we're ahead of the show, or ahead of the cast, or ahead of the characters. We know more than what the characters know, and we're kind of watching what happens, and we know what can happen because of what we know. So that's called, you know, player/viewer knowledge. And usually what happens is that in those situations where this is present, you know more than what the people in the story actually know, because you've seen other scenes that happen when those characters are not present, and so you know that there's like say like you're in an area and then the scene cuts to someplace else, and say it's one of the bad guys, and they say, oh, I want to set up an ambush for the people, you know, your characters that you're playing as, the party. I want to set up an ambush for them, try and kill them. Well, now you know that an ambush is coming at some point. The characters don't, so you're waiting for that event to happen. In my opinion, what the player should know is what the character should know. There should be very few times when the player knows more than what the characters do, because what happens when you have that situation, the player is no longer reacting to the story, they're reacting to their character's reactions, which means that they're not immersed anymore. Like, at that point, the fourth wall has been broken. The player knows that they are not these characters. They know things those characters don't know, so they aren't inhabiting the roles, right? It's, in my opinion, a cardinal sin of game design and cardinal sin of story writing in general. But it's, something that's ubiquitously used throughout pretty much any kind of medium that has the ability for storytelling. You're going to find a lot of stories that have this sort of dynamic in them, and it's really unfortunate because it detracts from what would be otherwise really interesting. Attack on Titan, for example, is a story where you don't know anything, usually, that Eren doesn't know. There are very few times where you are ahead of Eren and the other characters in the show. In fact, there are times when the characters are ahead of where you're at, so it's kind of the reverse thing. You know less than what the characters do. And if you know what I'm talking about, if you know, you know. Very specific moment in Season 2, where that actually happens, where the characters know more than you do, because there's a scene that happens that you don't see until after an event happens. That then it goes back to that scene to explain that the characters knew that this could happen. And I would say that's a genius bit of writing there, because for the characters to know something that you don't know, that means that when the thing happens, your reaction to those events are going to be more visceral, because weird noises. You have no idea what's going on. Usually, in modern media, you have some idea of what's going on before the characters in the story do. And that's backwards, in my opinion. So always try to never have that situation arise where your players know more than your characters do. If you have to cut away for like expositional reasons, or because it just makes the story make a bit more sense if the player knows this bit of information, try and make it something really specific and not hyper relevant to like the events that unfold, to the point where the player can then guess the progression of the events and how the story is going to happen. Because a lot of the times writers write this stuff and you just but you start to build up this compendium of knowledge that you use to, and then fill in the gaps in what you don't know, and then you can kind of guess how the story is going to unfold based on like the different tropes and stuff of the genre you're watching. That's because the writers give you too much information. They don't give you just what you need. You need to make sure you give the players just what they need to understand what's going on without allowing them to get ahead of where the story is going. Very difficult to do, but if you can pull it off, it'll make your story 10 times better. Easily. But it's something really hard to get right. Anyway, so that's it for this video. Comments, questions, link below. I'll catch you for the next one, where we'll be talking about intermediate cutscene stuff. This will be more about talking about some of the more mechanical kind of things as far as cutscenes go, as opposed to general concepts and stuff. Talking about how cutscenes are constructed, different things that you can do to make things work the way you want them to, and stuff like that. So yeah, till then, this is LP Games, and I'll catch you guys later.